Long before colonial churches echoed with hymns, or town plazas filled with guitars, early Filipinos already lived in a world shaped by sound. Music was not entertainment set apart from life. It was woven into ritual, labor, courtship, storytelling, and belief. Among the many indigenous instruments that existed before colonizers arrived, the kudlong stands out as both a musical tool and a cultural symbol. Known by various names across regions, the kudlong belongs to a family of fretted stringed instruments. These instruments are found primarily among indigenous communities in Mindanao and nearby islands. Its sound was intimate rather than grand, often played in close social settings where music carried meaning beyond melody. The kudlong reveals how early Filipinos understood music as a bridge between people, nature, and the unseen world. By tracing its use, construction, and cultural role, we uncover a precolonial soundscape. This precolonial soundscape connects the Philippines to wider Indigenous and Austronesian musical traditions across Southeast Asia and the Pacific, challenging the idea that Filipino music history began with foreign influence. The kudlong is typically described as a small, fretted lute with one or two strings, carved from a single piece of wood. While forms vary by community, its basic structure reflects an ancient understanding of resonance and rhythm. One string often carries a steady drone, while the other produces melodic variation, creating a hypnotic interplay that mirrors patterns found in ritual music across the world. Similar stringed instruments appear throughout island Southeast Asia. These similar instruments appear from Borneo to parts of Indonesia, suggesting long-standing cultural exchange through maritime travel and migration. Scholars generally agree that the kudlong predates colonial contact, though precise dating remains uncertain. This uncertainty remains due to the absence of written records and the organic materials used in its construction. What is clear is that the instrument existed in societies where music was learned orally and embodied through practice. It was not learned through written notation. This made musical knowledge flexible, adaptive, and deeply personal, shaped by each community's environment, cosmology, and social structure. In many indigenous Filipino societies, the kudlong was closely associated with storytelling and oral tradition. Epic narratives, genealogies, and mythic histories were often sung or chanted, with the kudlong providing rhythmic and melodic support. These performances were not passive entertainment. They were acts of memory preservation in cultures where history lived in sound rather than text. The player was not merely a musician but a cultural bearer. He was someone entrusted with stories that defined identity and belonging. Similar roles for stringed instruments can be found among griots in West Africa or bards in ancient Europe, highlighting a global pattern. This is a pattern where music and narrative intertwine. While specific songs and epics associated with the kudlong vary and are sometimes only partially remembered today, the instrument's role in sustaining oral knowledge is widely reported. This positions the kudlong as both an artistic and intellectual tool, essential to how early Filipinos understood their past and transmitted it to future generations. Beyond storytelling, the kudlong played an important role in courtship and social interaction. In some communities, young men used the instrument to accompany love songs, subtly expressing emotion through melody and rhythm. The soft, intimate sound of the kudlong made it ideal for close gatherings rather than large public ceremonies. Music became a language of emotion, allowing feelings to be communicated indirectly within social norms. These norms valued restraint and symbolism. Comparable practices appear across indigenous societies, where stringed instruments often accompany courtship rituals. From Southeast Asia to parts of Africa and the Americas, These similarities suggest that the Kudlong's social function was not accidental but part of a broader human tendency to use music as a safe and expressive medium for intimacy. While details differ across regions, the recurring theme is clear. The Kudlong was embedded in the emotional life of the community, shaping relationships as much as rituals. The materials used to make the Kudlong reflect a deep connection to the environment. Builders selected local hardwoods for the body, shaping them by hand using simple tools. Strings were traditionally made from plant fibers or animal materials, long before metal strings became available through trade. Frets might be carved directly into the neck or added using wax or bone. This allowed for flexible tuning systems that differed from Western scales. This reliance on natural materials meant that the instrument's sound was shaped by climate, landscape, and available resources. Similar ecological adaptation can be seen in indigenous instruments worldwide, where music evolves in dialogue with the natural world. The Kudlong was not mass-produced. Each instrument bore the mark of its maker. It also bore the mark of its environment. This individuality reinforced the idea that music was personal and communal rather than standardized, a reflection of how early Filipinos understood creativity itself. Ritual contexts add another layer of meaning to the Kudlong. In some traditions, it was reportedly played during ceremonies connected to healing, spiritual communication, or communal transitions such as harvests and rites of passage. While specific ritual uses are sometimes disputed or vary by community, many ethnographic accounts describe music as a conduit between the human and spirit realms. The steady drone of the Kudlong may have supported trance-like states. It may also have focused attention during rituals, similar to how stringed instruments function in spiritual practices in South Asia or Indigenous America. Sound, in these contexts, was not symbolic alone but believed to have real effect, even where precise ritual functions are uncertain. The repeated association of the Kudlong with ceremonial life underscores its importance beyond entertainment, placing it firmly within the spiritual landscape of early Filipino societies. The Kudlong did not exist in isolation, but as part of a broader musical ecosystem. It interacted with percussion instruments, bamboo, idiophones, flutes, and vocal traditions, forming layered soundscapes that accompanied communal life. While percussion instruments like gongs often dominated large ceremonies, stringed instruments added nuance, intimacy, and melodic depth. This balance between rhythm and melody mirrors musical systems across Southeast Asia. These ensembles combine different sound types to reflect social harmony. The coexistence of instruments also suggests a sophisticated understanding of musical roles, even without formal theory. Music was organized through practice and tradition rather than written rules, yet it achieved coherence and complexity. By viewing the Kudlong within this ensemble context, we see how early Filipino music functioned as a system. It functioned as a system rather than a collection of isolated sounds. Colonial encounters dramatically altered the Philippine musical landscape. Spanish missionaries introduced European instruments, scales, and religious music, often discouraging or marginalizing indigenous practices. Over time, guitars, violins, and Western harmonies became dominant in urban and Christianized areas. Yet the Kudlong survived in more remote and indigenous communities, adapting rather than disappearing. This pattern of musical survival mirrors experiences in other colonized regions, where traditional instruments persisted alongside or beneath imposed forms. In some cases, hybrid styles emerged, blending indigenous techniques with foreign instruments. The endurance of the Kudlong speaks to cultural resilience, showing how music can resist erasure even under pressure. Rather than viewing precolonial and colonial music as separate eras, the Kudlong reveals a continuum. It reveals a continuum shaped by adaptation, negotiation, and persistence. Modern scholarship on the Kudlong faces challenges common to the study of oral cultures. Much knowledge relies on oral histories, early ethnographic notes, and the memories of living practitioners. This means some interpretations remain uncertain or debated, especially regarding ancient tuning systems or ritual meanings. However, uncertainty does not diminish significance. Instead, it invites humility and collaboration. Increasingly, researchers emphasize listening to indigenous communities themselves, recognizing them as authorities on their own cultural heritage. Similar shifts are occurring globally, from Australia to the Americas. Indigenous voices are reshaping how musical history is written. The Kudlong thus becomes part of a broader conversation about who gets to define knowledge and how history is reconstructed. When placed in a global context, the Kudlong highlights shared human creativity. Stringed instruments appear independently across continents, from the lutes of Asia to the koras of Africa and the lyres of the ancient Mediterranean. While these instruments differ in form and sound, they share a common purpose: transforming vibration into meaning. The Kudlong's place within this global family does not require direct borrowing to be significant. Instead, it shows how human societies, responding to similar needs for expression and connection, arrived at comparable solutions. This perspective situates Filipino music within world history. It situates Filipino music within world history, not as a peripheral curiosity, but as part of a shared human story of sound. In recent decades, cultural revival movements have renewed interest in the Kudlong. Indigenous musicians, educators, and cultural workers are teaching younger generations how to build and play the instrument. They teach it often alongside traditional songs and stories. These efforts are not nostalgic but forward-looking, asserting cultural continuity in a rapidly changing world. Similar revivals are happening globally, where indigenous music is reclaimed as a source of strength and identity. Performances now appear not only in villages but also in schools, festivals, and international stages. This brings the Kudlong into dialogue with modern audiences while retaining its cultural roots. The sound of the Kudlong is often described as meditative, shaped by repetition and subtle variation rather than dramatic shifts. This musical aesthetic reflects a worldview that values balance, patience, and attentiveness. In societies where daily life was closely tied to agricultural cycles and natural rhythms, music echoed these patterns. Listening to the Kudlong today offers insight into how early Filipinos experienced time itself, not as rushed progression, but as flow. Comparable musical philosophies exist in other indigenous traditions, where repetition deepens meaning rather than diminishing it. This challenges modern assumptions about musical complexity and invites listeners to hear sophistication in restraint. Diaspora communities have also played a role in keeping instruments like the Kudlong visible. Filipino musicians abroad increasingly explore pre-colonial sounds as part of identity exploration, blending traditional instruments with contemporary genres. This global circulation reflects how culture travels and transforms, much like ancient maritime networks once did. While some worry about dilution or misrepresentation, others see opportunity for dialogue and renewed relevance. These debates mirror discussions in many cultures about tradition, authenticity, and innovation. The Kudlong's journey beyond its place of origin underscores how ancient instruments can speak to modern questions of belonging. Understanding the Kudlong also reframes how we think about Filipino history. It reminds us that before colonization, complex artistic systems already existed, grounded in philosophy, environment, and community. Music was not borrowed into a cultural vacuum. It was layered onto an existing foundation. Recognizing this challenges narratives that position indigenous Filipinos as passive recipients of foreign culture. Instead, the Kudlong reveals active creators whose musical knowledge deserves recognition on its own terms. This reevaluation aligns with broader global efforts to decolonize history and center indigenous contributions. When the strings of a kudlong vibrate today, they carry echoes of voices that lived long before written history. Each note connects past and present, reminding us that music is one of humanity's oldest languages. The kudlong does not shout its story. It invites listening. In its quiet resonance lies a record of ritual, relationship, and resilience, waiting for those willing to hear beyond modern noise. As more stories and sounds emerge from indigenous musical traditions, stay tuned for what these ancient strings may still reveal about who we were and who we are becoming.